When I was in 8th grade, I had a teacher, and she was a pretty nice person. However, she gave out a lot of homework. I really didn't like this at the time, as I had to spend a lot of time doing the homework and struggling through her class. And at first, I hated it. However, a few years later, when I made it to high school, I was really glad that she gave me all this homework, because her exposing me to the workload I would possibly have in high school and teaching me how potentially difficult it could be in 8th grade ended up benefiting me in the long run, as I learned that as it helped toughen me up for upcoming high school. Leading us into today's quote, which is, "To rise from the ashes, a phoenix must burn." To me, this means that no matter what, we'll always benefit through tough times, and like a phoenix, even though we will burn and struggle at times, we'll ultimately rise up and benefit from it in the long run. This can be proven through three examples. First, the popular book series The Hunger Games. Second, take a look at history and look at the Winter War. And finally, we'll look at the video game Rainbow Six Siege. Moving on to our first point, we'll take a look at the book The Hunger Games. The book The Hunger Games is set in a dystopian United States, in which the protagonist, Katniss Everdeen, is chosen to go fight to the death against 23 other kids in an event called the Hunger Games. A lot of the people in the districts of Panem, the place where the Hunger Games is set, are unhappy with their government for forcing their kids to go fight to death in the Hunger Games. However, Katniss is chosen. At first, she doesn't want to go, but is forced to due to her younger sister being chosen to go and Katniss volunteering to take her place. And while she struggles at first, she believes she's gonna die. She ends up surviving the Hunger Games and making a much bigger difference in the world. Katniss proved that even if you feel like you're weak going into something, you can ultimately survive. And many people in the district saw that, and they took that as a cry to rebel against the Capitol. And they did. They successfully overthrew their evil government and were able to live happily ever after. This shows that even though Katniss at first had to struggle through being picked to go to a Hunger Games that she really didn't want to go to and knew that she was likely going to die, it ended up being very beneficial to both her and people around her as they ended up overthrowing their oppressive government and living much happier lives. This relates back to the prompt, as it shows that Katniss figuratively burned by being chosen to fight in the Hunger Games that she didn't want to fight in, but it ended up being very beneficial, and the districts ended up rising as the ashes and living a much happier life overall. Moving on to our second point, we'll look at the Winter War. During World War II, Russia was at war with Germany, and they needed as many possible paths they could to attack Germany, and one of those paths was through the Nordic country Finland. However, the Finnish didn't want the Russians walking through their territory, and they decided to fight a war over it. And Russia, being the largest land area, one of the largest countries in the world, thought it would obviously be able to defeat Finland, being a very small Nordic country. But boy were they wrong. They ended up sustaining massive defeats in the snow that they weren't used to fighting in. The Finnish were used to this and rode around on skis and used Molotov cocktails to destroy Russian tanks. And they ended up delaying the Russian push for so long and causing so much death and destruction to the Russians ended up pulling out of Finland. And while this was a humiliating defeat at first, it ended up being very beneficial to them in the long run, as they learned strategies to help them fight during the cold winter, which, when Germany later invaded Russia and were fighting in Siberia, the Russians had a huge advantage. As they learned from the Finnish, they should always prepare for the winter, as they knew how devastating it could be. They equipped their soldiers with much thicker uniforms that could protect them in the snow, and equip them with more food and supplies, and it ended up being very beneficial. As Russia's success in the Eastern Front during the winter ended up proving pivotal to Germany's eventual defeat, and they couldn't have done it without struggling at first in Finland, showing that while they struggled at first, it ended up being worth it in the end, showing that they rise through the ashes. Moving on to our final point, we'll take a look at the video game The Rainbow Six Siege. Rainbow Six Siege is a very challenging video game to get in at first. Many players often quit just because of how difficult it can be and how frustrating it can be to play at times. However, if you continue to stick through it, it ends up becoming a very fun game to play. There are a lot of things you have to learn, like memorizing routes around the game's maps and learning what every character in the game does. When you finally do learn that, it's a very fun game to play. This was designed intentionally as a way to players with dedication and who with dedication with skill. This shows that Rainbow Six Siege is a direct example of how people who of how if we struggle at first, it would end up benefiting us as the end. As when I played it, I struggled at first a lot with it, but it's now one of my favorite games to play. And as it's now one of my favorite games to play, showing that showing that if you try hard, you'll eventually rise through the figurative ashes while playing the video game Rainbow Six Siege. In conclusion, I've proven that the quote, "To rise from the ashes, a phoenix must burn," means that we will always benefit through tough times even if it seems like we won't at first, proven through first, the Hunger Games, second, the Winter War, third, through the video game Rainbow Six Siege, and even from when I was given a lot of homework in middle school but it ended up benefiting me in high school.